say your finish is only as good as your foundation, and so prep is not the most fun part of the project, but it is important. And a lot of people ask me if they need to sand down to the natural wood or if they have to use a primer. When you use Farmhouse paint, and that's the product that I will be using on these tables, it has a built-in primer, but you do want to clean your piece well. And so the product I'm using here is called Pure Power, and you want to scrub it really well with the Pure Power and then use clean water to wipe off any residue from the cleaner. So you can see the scouring pad that I'm using. It's a non-abrasive pad, and I'm using that with the Pure Power to get in all the edges and details of this piece. And then I will take the clean water and spray that, and then use a clean cloth to wipe off the residue of that. So it doesn't take that long, but it is an important step. So sometimes I do like to sand a piece, and this is an example of where the finish was a high gloss finish. So I am just taking one of the rad pads, this is the finer grit pad, and just lightly sanding it quickly just to rough up the top, and it won't scratch it, but it just takes that high gloss finish off. And then I'm just wiping it back with a damp rag to get that dust off. And now I'm going to put my first coat of paint on. I'm using a Klingon brush. These are great brushes. They are made in the Netherlands and they are synthetic, so it gives your finish a great look. It helps with brush marks, and it really, you don't see the brush strokes when you use a good brush. So I always encourage you to get a good brush. Farmhouse paint has some good ones as well. This is just a larger brush. It's probably the 12-inch one, or no, I'm sorry, the 10-inch one, and it will just cover a larger area. And so when I'm doing tops of things or larger pieces, I like to use it, but I actually use it quite a bit on most projects just because it helps save time. So this is the second coat on the other table. I have two of these, so I'm doing them in stages and adding the second coat over the first coat. And I like to put the paint on and then pull it across. Sometimes I put it in little sections where I'll add the paint on and then pull a long brush stroke straight and go back and forth. But you don't want to overwork this paint. This is the Evolution line, and it does dry pretty quickly. It is made by Farmhouse Paint, but it is their ultra hard finish, and it does dry quite quickly. So once you put your first couple strokes down, just let it self-level and it will turn out to be a great finish. And don't overwork it, because you can kind of make it tacky and it ends up messing it up more than fixing it. So just let it self-level and it will do its work. This is the next step, and we are going to be decoupaging. And the paper that I'm using is by Rowe Treasures, and it is the Floral Burlap. And the funny thing is, it's not maybe funny, but it is interesting that people thought I actually put burlap on the sides of this piece because it looks so real, but it's much easier and also much more probably durable than real burlap, or maybe just cleaner. I feel like burlap would get dust and all that kind of stuff in the mix of it. But anyway, so what I'm doing here is I'm just going to measure out my piece, and I like to put it on the actual piece of furniture, and I like to score where I am going to cut with either a dull edge of something or my fingernail, my hand. You can just make a slight mark with your hand, and you can see where you want to cut it, because pieces of furniture, especially older ones, may not be exactly square or may not be exactly straight. And so when you do it this way, it's going to allow you to get the lines of the piece and cut it to the individual pieces. So now I'm ready to adhere the piece of paper to my piece of furniture. And what I'm using here is liquid patina by DIY Paint. I find it to be a great medium for decoupage, but there are lots of other ones out there. This is just the one that I seem to gravitate to more often. And so what I did here was I like to put a strip along the top first to get my piece of paper set onto the piece of furniture, and I work my way down. And once I have that piece set, I make sure it's straight and on the edges and each area is lined up correctly. Then I'm going to go and add my second line of liquid patina, and I like to make sure I get it up under there. Sometimes I overlap a little bit just to make sure that there's no areas that are missing the liquid patina. You want to get good full coverage. So this piece is not that big, so I'm actually just doing it in a couple sections. If you do work with a larger piece, you may, work your way down, but this piece wasn't that large, so it worked out well to just start at the top and then just add my second layer, and then the piece was adhered. I'm using a plastic bag over my hand. You can also use a piece of saran wrap or something like that. It'll just help with smoothing out your piece of paper. So on the front of these, the doors had a recessed panel, and what I'm doing here is I actually put the piece of paper entirely over the door, and I'm taking a sharp X-Acto knife to just make a little score or make a little hole around the edge of this, just so that I can get in a little bit closer with my sanding paper or sanding block to slightly rub the sanding paper over the edges, and that's going to give me a nice clean cut. You want to make sure that your paper is dry when you do this, because if you rush, and sometimes I get a little impatient and I try and do it, and it's gonna rip your paper. So the best way to do it is just let it fully dry. You can use a drying hair dryer or something like that if you need to, but I would just let it dry before you get into the sanding part of this. So now I'm just going to take that sanding paper. This is another rad pad. It's a little bit more of a rougher grit. I do think sometimes the sanding block may work better, but I didn't have one on hand, so I'm just using a piece of sanding paper to lightly rub the edges, and that's going to give you a straight cut, and it's going to follow the lines of where the door's edges are, so that the paper will just cover those edges, and then the inside of that panel will just be the painted area. The other thing I forgot to mention is I did distress this a little bit before I got to this part, so as you look, you can kind of see some of the areas where I did sand off some of the paint, and I like to do that on this piece just because the paper really lends itself to looking older and distressed. You don't always have to do that. And here I also wanted to note that I painted over the hinges and then wiped it back because I wanted to keep that almost looks like it's just older and aged that way. If I wanted to, I could have taken off the hinges and kept them, you know, super clean. But I like the look of sometimes actually painting over the hardware. And when I finish this piece, I think I actually have a picture of it at the end where you will see that I took the hardware of the doors and just put a little paint dry brushed on them as well. Now, once I have the paper the way I like it, there's a few little edges where I can see it's not totally adhered on the edge, and that's fine. We'll add some extra liquid patina when we get to that point. But right now I'm just brushing off with a clean brush to make sure I get all the dust of any of that paper and distressing off. And then I'm going to put a top coat over it with the liquid patina again to seal the paper onto this piece. So I'm again going to use the Farmhouse grip brush and adding a coat of liquid patina over top of it. Here's where I'm going to get those little edges underneath as well, and then put some liquid patina on the top. And I also go into all the edges of the part that was painted and there's not paper, because I want the whole piece to have the same finish. And so I wanted to make sure it looks uniform, whether it's painted or paper. So just putting the final coat on, and I used actually probably 2 or 3 coats on this paper. I didn't need to put a top coat on the top. But again, this was Floral Burlap by Upcycled Papers, and the paint is Evolution by Farmhouse Paint, organic white. You can find the products on my website, and if you haven't already subscribed, please do to my YouTube channel, and I appreciate your support. Stop in and see me sometime if you're local.